There's a fabric so rare and so luminous that for centuries, emperors and popes were the only individuals that were allowed to wear it. It shimmers like spun gold, it's almost weightless, and it doesn't fade, not in decades, not in centuries. And it doesn't come from sheep, silkworms, or plants. It comes from clams. Hi, my name is Taylor, and today I want to talk to you about sea silk and why a recent scientific breakthrough around this material sent me down a bit of a research rabbit hole. This video was actually inspired by an email I received over in the tip line from a viewer who shared a news story about scientists recreating sea silk using discarded clam fibers. And the more I read, the more I realized it wasn't just a cool science headline. It was a story about fiber, history, and values that felt very much at home here. Sea silk isn't silk in the way that we usually think of silk. It's made from byssus threads. These are incredibly fine hair-like fibers that certain clams produce to help anchor them to rocks on the sea floor. These threads are strong, flexible, and naturally glossy. Historically, the most prized source of sea silk was a Mediterranean clam called Pinna nobilis. It's a massive clam. Some have been found up to 4 feet long, and it produces byssus threads that can be harvested, cleaned, and spun into an unbelievably fine fiber. It fascinates me anytime we get into spinning thread or fiber out of really remarkably fine materials. It just absolutely blows my mind. So naturally, this really sent me down a rabbit hole. Historical descriptions say that sea silk was as fine as a child's hair. One researcher describes wearing a sea silk glove feels like wearing nothing at all. And most strikingly, the fiber was naturally golden without dye. Sea silk has been documented for nearly 2,000 years. Roman writers described garments that required not just farming and harvesting for the textiles, but fishing for the materials used to create the fabrics. For centuries, sea silk was associated with extreme rarity and prestige. It was never common, it was never fast, and it was never produced in large quantities. But the tradition largely came to an end in the late 20th century. Harvesting Pinna nobilis was banned in the European Union in the late 1990s, and after a massive population collapse, the species was officially considered endangered in 2019, which meant this entire textile tradition, the knowledge, the technique, the fiber itself, was effectively frozen in time until recently. Researchers in South Korea asked a deceptively simple question. What if sea silk didn't have to come from an endangered species? They turned their attention to the Atrina pectinata, a close relative of Pinna nobilis. This clam is widely farmed for food in Korea, and crucially, its byssus threads are usually discarded as waste. However, the research team has recently discovered that the byssus fiber of Atrina pectinata are chemically and physically very similar to those of the endangered Mediterranean species. So instead of inventing a new industrial process, they replicated the traditional one. The fibers of the Atrina pectinata were rinsed, washed, air-dried, combed, spun on spindles, and finally soaked in citric acid, essentially a lemon bath, just as historic sea silk artisans had done. The result was golden fibers that were virtually indistinguishable from traditional sea silk. Same look, same sheen, same softness, but made from a material that would otherwise have been thrown away. This is where the science becomes especially fascinating. Most fibers get their colors from pigments or dyes, unless of course we're referring to an animal that has fiber that comes in a variety of different colors, but usually those are quite naturally occurring and not as fun or glamorous as something that's, say, I don't know, golden.
Gold!
Sea silk is different. Its golden color comes from structure, not pigment. The fibers are made primarily of spherical proteins that assemble into highly ordered nanostructures. Stay with me. These structures interact with light in very specific ways, similar to how butterfly wings or soap bubbles create iridescence. In untreated fibers, iron ions block this effect. But when the fibers are soaked in citric acid, the iron is removed and the golden shimmer appears. And if that doesn't just blow your mind, then I don't know. Except I can definitely definitely imagine that not blowing the mind of certain people, but it certainly blows mine. Now, because this color comes from physical structure and not chemical dye, what does it not do over time? That's right, it doesn't fade. It doesn't go away because it's embedded in the structure. It's not even embedded in the structure, it is the structure itself. Researchers suggest that the color can remain stable over thousands of years. That's not poetic language, that's not hyperbole, that is materials science. Now, although sea silk appears impossibly delicate, it's surprisingly durable. Those spherical proteins are reinforced by a mesh of sugars and matrix proteins that stabilize structure. I would like to be reinforced by a mesh of sugars. I have a sweet tooth today. I need a mesh of sugars. The more ordered the internal structure, the more brilliant the golden color, and the more durable the fine fiber. So what looks fragile is actually carefully reinforced at the molecular level, which helps explain why historic sea silk artifacts still exist today, looking as great as they do. Okay, now I want to pause here because this is really important. And this is not to be negative. This is just to be honest, and those two things don't have to go hand in hand. With stories like this, there are always questions worth asking. Is this actually scalable? Even though Atrina pectinata is widely farmed, sea silk production is extremely labor intensive. The amount of usable fiber per clam is small, and the processing is slow and meticulous. This is not going to become a mainstream textile, and framing it as such would be misleading. This is proof of concept, not a large scale solution. And I believe that we didn't really need a large scale solution for making more sea silk. I don't think that people need sea silk, but it is just absolutely fascinating. Second question, does luxury undermine sustainability? The phrase sustainable luxury makes some people uneasy, and understandably so. Luxury has historically been exclusive. Exclusivity doesn't automatically equal ethical impact. Some critics argue reviving rare high-end materials doesn't meaningfully address broader environmental problems. Others counter that longevity, durability, and reverence for material are core sustainability values, and that luxury doesn't have to mean wasteful. Another one is, what about aquaculture impacts? Even though this research focuses on using existing waste, aquaculture isn't in itself impact-free. If interest in byssus fibers ever grew, questions about ecosystem effects, farming practices, and unintended pressure would matter. Right now, the distinction is important. This work uses what already exists. Scaling it would require careful guardrails. And finally, this one comes in whenever we talk about ancient fabrics coming back into some kind of mainstream recognition, and that is, are we romanticizing the past? Ancient textiles weren't automatically ethical or benign. They existed within social and labor systems we wouldn't want to recreate wholesale. What makes this research compelling isn't nostalgia, it's selective learning. It takes historical knowledge, adds modern science, and operates within modern ethical limits. For me, acknowledging those questions doesn't weaken the story, it strengthens it. This isn't being presented as the future of textiles. It's an example of what becomes possible when waste is treated as material, when craft knowledge is respected, and when science is used to understand why something works, not just that it does. It invites curiosity rather than consumption. And in a world saturated with fast answers and louder solutions, that feels worth paying attention to. This was genuinely such a fun topic to go down the rabbit hole on, and I'm really glad I got to share it with you. Thank you to the person who sent me the news article in my inbox. If you have topics you would like me to explore here on the channel, send them over to me. My email is down below. In the meantime, happy knitting, happy making, happy whatever it is that you're doing. Take care, be well, and I will see you soon. Bye.